One of my first introductions to power noise, which I would mostly recognize by the name rhythmic noise at the time, was this 2002 album by Hypnoskull called Operation Tough Guy. Since then, I've yet to find many albums that would manage to surpass or even reach the quality of this album, and I don't think it's simply because it's one of the first albums I've listened to in the genre. Even for Hypnoskull standards, if we are to compare this with previous works, there are some significant change-ups that make this release stand out compared to the rest. Patrick Stevens started the project of Hypnoskull back in 1992. After a series of demo cassettes, you might mostly recognize some works like Fast Forward Burnout and Electronic Music Means War to Us. Those albums were still pretty intense, but there was a sense of industrial techno and powerful catchy elements. The next album going forward, Operation Tough Guy, is not necessarily the least talked about album, but it's certainly a more obscure and more experimental release, bordering closer to straight up power noise, but also goes into many other directions that make it really interesting. The other album with this amount of creativity I would say is the follow-up Dark Skies over Planet E, but it was not that much of a consistent album in terms of quality in my opinion. Operation Tough Guy, outside of a few moments towards the end, has almost half the tracks being some of the greatest stuff in the entire sphere of intense underground electronic music. And we're talking about a massive album with 20 tracks and over an hour of material, and it's crazy how much good stuff it's in there. And even if that's not enough for you, fear not, because there's an entire second album called Operation Mean Machine with bonus tracks and also some remixes, which is not gonna be a big topic of discussion in this video because truth be told it serves simply as a collection of bonus tracks and remixes that is just decent and doesn't really need that much attention. There's not anything in particular worth noting about it, but if you happen to find the compilation with a double CD including the bonus material, pick it up, because to this day this is one of the sickest packages I've got in my collection, and this warning sign, outside of being on point with industrial and power noise aesthetics, it's also really accurate, because this album is extremely loud. It's not just that there's a lot of distortion or a lot of noise, it's a loud album. Everything is cranked up to 11, but here's the most intriguing and most creative thing about this album. It's quite sparse. Certain tracks are not really all that intense outside of certain parts. They're still loud, but the instrumentation can be quite minimal and not rely on walls of noise, for example. This keeps the listening experience constantly engaging, while there are some recurring sounds and beats that make their appearance more than once. The way he experiments with all of those sounds for 20 tracks constantly makes this refreshing from start to finish, though this different approach might not be for everyone. It's more likely that you're going to enjoy something like his previous works that I mentioned beforehand. They are more straightforward and have the elements of techno that would fit for a dark underground nightclub setting. I managed to see Hypnoskull live on his first appearance in Greece not that long ago, and the set, while pretty intense and noisy at times, had a lot of elements that are more reminiscent to industrial techno. Operation Tough Guy contains elements like this, but it's not the main one. It's one of a kind, and its risks, obscurities and variations not only make this the best thing that I've heard out of Hypnoskull by a long shot, but also, like I said, one of the greatest albums I've ever heard when it comes to underground electronic music. The album has a lot going on to it, and it starts on a really strong note with "And Here I Stay" serving as an intro, and it's actually one of the most interesting tracks in the album, containing some of the more interesting aspects I was mentioning before. It has a more industrial tone at the beginning, and then you get these minor explosions of drum and bass breakbeats and sub-bass. Then it goes back to sound slightly more chill, and as the track goes on it incorporates a few elements such as magnificent vocal effects that tie with industrial aesthetics, and the sound sort of degrading with the use of flanger. The reprise of Operation Tough Guy has been stuck in my head for years at this point, and it is arguably one of the greatest tracks I've heard from the 2000s. This is where shit hits the fan. This track is absolutely mental, insanely loud, minimally repeated drum beats, and sounds that all progressively blend together, or more to say, bleeding together. And then it's the cycle of those distorted female vocals that sound kinda nightmarish. Panned hard right and a few times hard left, and then it's back again on being an onslaught of sounds from distorted mechanical drumming to hazardous machinery type high-pitched monotone synths. This track perfectly represents, in my opinion, the image of the album cover. It has this sense of danger to it, in an environment filled with machines, and just sounds that melt your brain. It's hard to describe it, but this additional sound, accompanied with the kicks that usually comes after the vocals, this noisy sort of extra kick, this non-stop percussive sound, is one of the most insane beat sounding choices I've ever heard in a song. I've yet to find anything else that has a sound like this. In the next two tracks, Techno Thrill and Dead Track 2002, keep up with the menacing and relentless energy without that much of a melodic element to them though. They are mostly minimal and straightforward, with mostly just a beat to them and only some slight change-ups in the structure. In terms of Techno Thrill, it makes sense to be as short as it is, since it doesn't really do much with its idea, so it's fine that it doesn't unnecessarily drag on. Both of those tracks serve as a nice continuation of what the album was providing at the beginning, without necessarily being some of the most standout moments, but they have some cool ideas to offer anyways. Things pick up once again with the excellent On and On. It brings back the intense vocals, which are mostly short sentences. They work as an extra element in the overall instrumentation, and the repetition is infectious. As for the music, it's another beat-centered track. There's not a whole lot to the instrumentals, such as a melody or any kind of ambience, and the beat is not one of the most intense in the sense that it's a bit more slow, nothing really over the top, but it's another showcase of a really creative output nonetheless. And now this is the first minor shift that we get with the track Biotech Brain Killers. The beat has a very familiar structure. It's the pacing though that has this little twist, because it's not a non-stop headbanger. It takes its time to reach a climax, and even when it does, it just happens without any type of suspense or surprise. It feels more as like part of the flow. It mostly revolves around those cut-up vocal samples and the grandiose tone percussion that gives an interesting character to the whole track. Not necessarily one of my personal favorites, but it was always a bit of a standout in the context of the album for being a curveball compared to the non-stop insanity of all of the beats that we got beforehand. And now we get the original Operation Tough Guy, that is quite different compared to the reprise, but still manages for its own different reasons to become one of the most outstanding tracks in the whole album. This is the closest that we get to an industrial techno sound that was more prominent with the previous works he would do. It's dynamic, catchy, melodic, extremely energetic, and this could easily fit in the setting of a dark underground club, since the rest of this album feels more of like a set of experimentations that fit more in a home setting, giving it a proper listen. There's really nothing else in this album that feels similar to the original version of the self-titled track. It comes closer to the sense of a mindless industrial techno track to dance to, but still the volume is cranked up to 11. The distortion is insane, especially when the bass hits those hi-hats. The sound becomes extremely rough. It's so loud, the compression on this is crazy, just like it happens with a big portion of the album, so you know you're still listening to the same project. In terms of presentations, it also features the same female vocal parts like with the reprise, but without the crazy panning, and anything else is completely different, from the melodies to the whole mood. Crazy that both of those versions work so well for really different reasons. The track Stainless Steel Stereo-Equipped Animals might be the most insane moment over here. It has a similar vocal direction with On and On, and the beat starts on a pretty basic tone, nothing we haven't heard before, but all of a sudden the beat completely changes and becomes really fast, the hi-hats become extremely distorted. It's a relentless, furious track that stands out for being batshit insane. Once again, it keeps all of the great elements of On and On with the vocals, with one of the best beats in this entire album. Ready to Scream, Ready to Die is one of the lengthier moments and also one of the most varied. The beat stays the same and it's an incredible beat, but it also constantly puts multiple industrial type synths that give the essence of alarms and a heavily mechanic environment. Another track that keeps amazingly the essence of a demented, industrialized workplace. It features some of the greatest ideas with sounds that are already familiar and strong in their nature. Almost halfway towards the album we get Salt Labor Central, one of the tracks over here that I would consider a 10 out of 10. This is one of the most apparent change-ups in mood and style we get, since it has this more refreshing element that I was mentioning that keeps the experience constantly engaging. There's not that much of an emphasis on the beat, which only comes in a few occasions and mostly feels like a little addition here and there. The track focuses the most on its industrial ambience, with its subtle weird melody that gets accompanied with a dynamic snare and other few percussions and high frequency industrial synths that might sound a bit obnoxious to some of you, but for me it elevates this alienating and alarming industrial aesthetic that the album knows how to nail down so well, and this is a prime example for me. The grating loudness of those sounds also contributes to the unwelcoming nature that makes this whole experience so overwhelming. One of the darkest and most imaginative moments over here, a masterful industrial piece. No Man You're Not Right Man is like a great continuation of the formula of the very first track. It drops those subtle parts of drum and bass breaks, nice use of vocal sampling, and as it goes on, its ambience is an extremely haunting and dark sound, probably one of the best in the whole album. It's more upfront than the intro, and it also doesn't introduce many different ideas, so it makes sense to keep it just as another short track. The next two tracks are the first occasions where for me the album becomes a bit samey, but they are still great ideas in their execution. I just think that their placement in the track listing is the weakest, since the way the one track finishes with vocal parts and then the next track also starts just with spoken word and with the same type of effect as well, it doesn't really make it feel like a nice blend, but rather something easily preventable and kinda awkward. The great thing about both We Know It All, We Know All and Rock and Roll Into Your Electronic is that they're both two of the most melodic and rhythmic moments in the album, and they work really well on what they do. The vocals also once again are those constantly repeated sentences with a lot of distortion to them, and they still don't fail to create a strong impression and add nicely with what the rest of the song is doing. The deleted scans of Hidden Territories is bizarre. This is the first moment where the track never actually picks up, and it doesn't need to. I like that it's the most subtle moment with glitchy type sounds, a calm beat, and a weird use of sampling. It's an infectious idea, but I'd like to see it extended a little bit more rather than being presented as an interlude. For me, this could have been one of the craziest ideas over here if it gave it a little bit more space to show its true colors rather than let it be as short as it is. But then the next track, What We Are, What We Do, keeps on showcasing the immense imagination behind a lot of moments in this album, with another moment in the track listing that I would consider a 10 out of 10. Just as the title suggests, all of the vocal parts over here basically describe all of the genres and style you're going to find in this project. It's a loop that constantly says breakbeats, electronic, dance music, jungle, industrial, and in random moments it also pops up techno and lo-fi. All of this attached to a sick beat that constantly evolves, including more industrial sounds, and it becomes one of the most addictive ideas the project has to offer. Very well done, and conceptually I find it very intriguing. The track Dirt Funk Slam uses its jungle breaks in a heavily distorted manner, mostly just blending in with the rest of the heavily aggressive instrumental in a background noise fashion. There's not really that much about this particular track. It's a cool idea but doesn't really go on for that much long. Now, I'm left in a weird position when it comes to the next track, Everything is Operationable. This is in my opinion one of the most unique and special moments over here, another track that seems to give a strong emphasis on ambience and dark atmosphere, with its sounds being placed in sparse positions and leaving empty space that adds to this bizarre claustrophobic feeling that this track emits in one way or another. The thing is though that this is the longest moment over here, and it doesn't really need to. When the beat comes, it doesn't really develop into anything more, and for some reason the main melodic aspect decides to progressively pitch down and change key. And I don't really know why. It doesn't sound all that fitting considering how amazingly it starts the way it is. Another track that in my opinion had the potential to be even greater with a different pacing, but I still consider it a standout moment due to its atmosphere being kinda different compared to a big portion of this album. With Prophecies of the Hidden Agenda we get another short moment with jungle breaks that does have one of the most haunting sounds out of the whole project, but it doesn't really develop all that much and ends up feeling somewhat lackluster and just an experimentation that is cool in certain regards. Reaching the end is where the album feels like it doesn't have that much left to it, and lets out its more predictable and more unengaging moments. At this point it feels like we already listened to the final two songs before and done better. The final track, Operation Tough Guy But We'll Be Back, is a kinda nice way to close the album, having this more conceptual aura to it as a reminder of the themes that keep reoccurring throughout the project. But yeah, for the most part, a couple of these final tracks feel slightly underdeveloped and they don't really let their ideas get developed into something even more compelling. But then again, it was also not that necessary in my opinion to have 20 tracks. Like the last 3 tracks could have easily been cut off in my opinion. It would be more interesting if things indeed ended with everything is operational. Now, when it comes to the bonus CD, Operation Mean Machine, it's basically bonus tracks and 3 remixes at the end from Converter, which are not even remixes out of tracks from Operation Tough Guy. Now, this album is pretty decent, but if you decide to not give this a shot, you're not really missing something. The main issue that I have with the bonus material is that it doesn't have the elements that make Operation Tough Guy such a special release. The volume is not to the max, it's not overcompressed, it doesn't sound completely unhinged or extremely distorted, it's mostly just dynamic and intense industrial techno, which is fine, but mostly feels like bonus material from his previous albums rather than this one. So you get more Hypnoskull, but you don't really get more Operation Tough Guy. It's more safe, more approachable, which like I said, not a bad thing whatsoever. But this is the thing. Operation Tough Guy is one of a kind. It's more of like a risk, an experiment. It's rhythmic and catchy, but not for a club setting, even an underground one. This album is a head scratcher and holds a special place for me as one of the first and most defining power noise projects I have ever heard. To this day, this album's menacing and extreme approach on industrial cannot easily be topped. This is the perfect soundtrack for encapsulating the horror and power of machines, and this is why Operation Tough Guy by Hypnoskull is, in my opinion, an essential. Let me know down in the comments your opinions about this album. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.